Hey, and welcome to my channel where I experiment with different materials and techniques. In this video, I'm continuing the Viking Age inspired series and showing you how I made this fur mantle. This might be the first clothing tutorial where I'm not starting with a pattern. The need for the patterns really depends on what kind of a mantle you want to make and what kind of a fur you will be working with. Today I'm working with 4 tanned rabbit hides. The reason I'm using rabbit is because rabbit is affordable and I wasn't looking for anything too bulky. There's also a couple of hare species living in Scandinavia where the Vikings traded commodities for fur, and while the domestic rabbit is a completely different species from the wild hares, it's possible that hare fur was used in clothing and the color of the fur would have been more of a brown or white depending on the season. I also prefer using rabbit fur over fox or other type of fur because this fur is actually a byproduct of meat farming, which means that the whole animal was used instead of being farmed or trapped solely for the fur. You can always use faux fur for this as well, and this video would still be applicable. So I had already pinned all the pieces together, making sure that the fur is going in the same direction in all of the pieces. I had then tried the fur on to see how it lays on my shoulders, and the curved seams that appear naturally here actually contort my shoulders nicely, so I decided to leave them in. Now, you can decide if you want to make this mantle more rugged, meaning that you can try to pin the fur more unevenly to give it a barbaric look, but according to some Finnish sources I found, we don't really know what the fur garments looked like in the Viking era. We know that fur was very sought after because the Vikings actually traded with Finns who would be the ones to trap the animals. It has been speculated that because Finland was so swampy, difficult to navigate, and didn't have any other resources that the Vikings would have desired, they didn't think that it was necessary to invade the area, but thought that it would be easier if the locals handled the trapping for them. In any case, there's some evidence suggesting that fur was used as a trim on clothing, but from what I gathered from the sources is that they most likely didn't wear these type of mantles. And even if they did, they most likely made them look nice and finished instead of wrapping a whole wall hanger around the neck. So therefore, I'm also trying to make this mantle a bit more finished. I decided to fold some of the fur inside as I wanted to have the fur against my neck and not have any of the skin side showing. I'm also marking down any bits that don't line up at the seams, as the method of stitching requires that the seam allowance on both pieces is the same. And I'm cutting away any excess pieces in order to make the mantle symmetrical. If you use scissors, you might end up cutting the fur itself, so I'm suggesting using a utility knife and cutting the piece from the skin side. Next, I start to pin the pieces together properly, trying to line up the edges and keep the fur on the fur side. If you have these little clips that I used in my corset making video, you might want to use them instead, but I couldn't find mine, so I used these ballpoint pins. With these pins, it's quite difficult to keep the hair from sticking up, but it's not really going to show much even if some of it's trapped between the seam. Next, grab a thread that is about the same color as the root of the hair. I ran out of the small spool quite fast, so you will most likely need more thread than what is shown here. Start stitching through both of the pieces and come up across the edge. Then stitch next to the first stitch and come up over again. You can continue like this, or you can stitch twice through the same hole to make this stitch stronger. Once you have finished stitching, you can try to fish out some of the hair that might have gotten trapped between the seam. This was quite difficult to do, so I just brushed on the seam and you can't really tell where the pieces were attached. As you can see here, the rabbit skin is quite thin and at some point it was shaven a bit too close to the hair follicle. This means that if any more skin gets rubbed off of those parts, the hair might start to fall off. For that reason, I wanted to make a liner for this mantle. You probably don't have to do this if you're working with thicker hides like fox or sheep. Also, it's difficult to imagine that Vikings would have lined their fur garments, so I thought I'd just grab something that had a nice color and smooth texture instead of caring about the historical accuracy at this point. I'm literally using a mixture of unidentified fibers, as Walmart had very descriptively labeled this fabric, and I had traced the outlines of my mantle on the fabric, and now I'm purposely cutting the liner a tad bit smaller than the fur so that once the liner is attached, the fur is actually curling in a bit at the edges without exposing the liner underneath. Then I pinned the liner and the fur right sides together, just like I did with the fur pieces, and used the same stitch to attach the liner. Once the liner was attached, I turned the fur right side out and started pinning down the neckline. I attached the folded part of the liner with just a couple of stitches here and there. Then I finished the project with a metal clasp. This is absolutely not period appropriate and looks to be more of a fantasy design, but you can use a cloak pin or a string to attach your mantle if you'd like. And here is the finished mantle. I hope you liked the video, and if you did, don't forget to like and leave a comment. If you want to see how I made the leather pouch, check out my previous video, and if you'd like to see how I made the belt using actual Iron Age methods, then subscribe to my channel and see you soon. As always, thank you for watching and happy crafting!